Have you ever, like, taken a test that just felt completely, utterly unfair?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we all have, right?
Right. Or maybe you've stared at a report card or even a performance review at work, and you just wonder how a single letter grade could possibly sum up months of your hard work.
Yeah, a single number trying to capture like an entire year of effort. It's tough.
It really is. You put in the late nights, you did the reading, you felt like you totally understood the material, and then boom, a C minus, or, a 3 out of 5 on a corporate evaluation.
Right. And it can be incredibly frustrating. I mean, it makes you question if the person grading you actually understands what you bring to the table at all.
Exactly. And that is basically our mission for this deep dive today. We're going to decode the hidden machinery of grading, testing, and, well, human learning itself.
It's a huge topic. We live in
Yeah.
this society that is just obsessed with grading and ranking human performance, but very few of us actually understand the underlying mechanics of how those judgments are made.
Yeah, we just kind of accept the grade and move on. We don't realize there's an entire science dedicated to how those numbers are generated.
Absolutely.
So to look into this, we're pulling back the curtain using a really fascinating source today. It's a comprehensive reviewer for the licensure examination for teachers, or the LET.
Yeah, essentially the manual that educators study
Yeah.
to learn exactly how to assess and grade us.
Right. But I want to be super clear here, even if you're not a teacher, even if you haven't set foot in a classroom in 20 years, this deep dive is going to completely change how you view performance, feedback, and your own learning journey.
Oh, for sure. Because the ultimate goal of our discussion today isn't just to talk about, like, academic policy.
Right. It's bigger than that.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's to explore the fundamental science of how we effectively measure knowledge, how we provide meaningful feedback, and really how we encourage actual growth in any environment, whether that's a corporate office, a sports team, or just your own personal development.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to understand how to properly test someone, we have to clarify our terminology, right?
We do. Terminology is everything here.
Right. So in educational psychology, people use three crucial words interchangeably all the time. They say measurement, assessment, and evaluation. And apparently doing that is a massive mistake.
That was a huge mistake, yeah.
Hmm.
In the educational framework, these are three very distinct steps.
Okay, so break that down for me. What is measurement?
So measurement is simply the act of assigning a numerical value to a characteristic. It's purely objective data.
Like just a raw score.
Exactly. A test score of 85%, or, a height of 170 centimeters,
Mhm.
a sprint time of 12 seconds. That is measurement.
Okay.
It carries no inherent judgment, right? It's literally just a raw number.
Right, it's just the data point itself. So then what is assessment?
Assessment is the broader, ongoing, systematic process of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting that evidence.
So you're putting the number into context.
Precisely. You are gathering context around the measurement. And then finally, you have evaluation.
Which is the judgment part.
Yeah, evaluation is when you use that interpreted evidence to make a value judgment about quality or worth or effectiveness.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to help visualize this because I think it maps perfectly to something you probably have on your wrist right now.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
Think about wearing a fitness tracker, right? If I look down at my watch at the end of the day and I see that I took exactly 10,000 steps, that's measurement.
Right, just a number.
Right, it doesn't tell me if that's good or bad for my specific body. Now, if I spend a month looking at my weekly step trends, my resting heart rate, and my sleep data to understand my overall fitness habits, that is assessment.
Exactly, because you're collecting and interpreting a wide variety of data over time.
But when I go to my doctor and she looks at all of that compiled data, considers my age and my medical history, and says, you are healthy enough to run a marathon, that is evaluation.
That is a perfect analogy. That really nails it. And what's fascinating here is that educational theory warns heavily against skipping that middle step.
Skipping the assessment part.
Yeah. Evaluation without ongoing assessment is just a hollow judgment.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see that.
Think about a terrible boss who looks at one single measurement, say 1 week of low sales numbers, and they jump straight to evaluation, telling you that you're a poor employee.
Oof. Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. They have completely skipped the assessment phase. They haven't looked at the broader context of the market, your past performance, or what you actually know how to do.
Which perfectly explains why so many of those final grades or performance reviews feel so incredibly unfair.
Exactly.
We feel like we're being evaluated without truly being assessed. So now that we know the difference between collecting data and judging it, we have to look at the intent behind the test.
Right, the why. Why are we collecting this data in the first place?
Yeah, and the educational frameworks generally break this down into three core purposes: assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment AS learning.
Right. So let's start with assessment for our learning, which is technically known as formative assessment.
Formative, okay.
Yeah, it's ongoing. It's embedded directly into the instruction itself. The goal here is not to give a final grade, but to provide immediate feedback that helps a student or an employee improve during the actual learning process.
Can you give me an example of what that actually looks like in practice? Because it sounds a little abstract.
Absolutely. A great example is a KWL chart.
KWL.
Yeah. Before starting a new topic, a teacher asks the class to write down what they already know about the subject and what they want to know. That's the K and the W.
Oh, okay.
Then, after the lesson, they write down what they learned, the L, the diagnostic tool. Or think about like digital polling in a modern classroom or a corporate presentation.
Like when you answer on your phone.
Exactly. A presenter asks a multiple choice question mid-lecture. Everyone answers on their phones. If the presenter sees that 60% of the room got it wrong, they immediately know they need to stop and explain the concept in a different way.
Right.
The grade doesn't go on a report card. It's just a tool to navigate the learning.
So it's essentially checking the GPS while you're still driving to make sure you're on the right route, rather than waiting until you arrive at the wrong destination to look at the map.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Yeah.
Then you have assessment of learning, which is summative.
Summative. So this is the big one.
Yeah, this is conducted at the end of a unit, a semester, or a course.
Yeah.
The purpose here is to evaluate overall achievement and report what has actually been learned.
Like final exams.
Right. Quarter examinations, final projects, standardized tests. These are summative. The results are used to assign grades and make final decisions about promotion or accountability.
Okay, let's unpack this, because
Alright.
here's where I have to push back a little bit. The research clearly shows that formative assessment, the ongoing ungraded kind, like the digital polling, produces some of the largest gains in actual student achievement of any educational intervention out there.
It does. It's incredibly effective.
So if that is mathematically true, if formative checks are what actually build knowledge, why on earth are we so obsessed with summative, end-of-year, high-stakes exams? Why put so much pressure on a single day?
Well, this raises a really important question, and it highlights a massive tension in our society between systemic accountability and actual human growth.
Right, because the system needs the numbers.
Exactly. Summative assessments, those big final exams, are necessary for structural reasons. Schools, universities, parents, and governments, they all need a standardized, auditable way to certify that learning has occurred at the end of a period.
You need a diploma to prove you are actually qualified to do the job.
Right. However, as educators say, you can't improve a cake once it's already baked. Summative assessment just weighs the pig. It doesn't feed the pig.
Oh, wow. I love that.
It's true. The diagnostic power of formative assessment is what feeds the pig. It catches misconceptions early. The most effective environments use both, but they understand that the formative checks are the actual mechanism of learning.
That makes so much sense. And that brings us to the third purpose, which educational psychologists consider the most sophisticated form, which is assessment AS learning.
Yes, this one is fascinating.
This is when the learners themselves use the assessment process to monitor their own progress. They use rubrics or journals to develop metacognitive awareness.
Which is really just a fancy way of saying they understand how their own brains work.
Right. They become conscious of their own learning process.
It's a profound shift, honestly. It moves the learner from being a passive recipient of a grade from an authority figure to an active participant in evaluating their own progress.
It's empowering, but if we agree that we still need those summative exams for systemic accountability, how do we decide the baseline?
What do you mean?
Like, when you take a high-stakes test, who are you being compared to? Are you being compared to your peers sitting next to you, or are you being compared to some objective standard?
Okay, yes. This is a critical distinction in testing. It's norm-referenced versus criterion-referenced assessments.
Okay, so norm-referenced first.
Right. Norm-referenced assessment compares your performance to the performance of a normative group. Literally, the other people who took the test.
Okay.
Your results are expressed in relative terms, like percentile ranks. The entire purpose is to rank and compare.
So this is grading on a curve. If the test is impossibly hard and everyone fails, but you manage to fail slightly less than everyone else, congratulations, you're at the top of the class.
Exactly. National achievement tests or college entrance exams often use norm referencing because they need to distribute students across a bell curve to see who the top 10% actually are.
That makes sense for college admissions.
Right, but then you have criterion reference assessment.
Hmm.
This measures performance against a predetermined standard or criterion completely, regardless of how anyone else performs.
And the materials we're looking at point out that the Philippine Department of Education's K-12 grading system is a perfect example of this. It's strictly criterion referenced.
Yes.
It uses specific weights for written work, performance tasks, and quarterly assessments. But there is a fascinating psychological quirk in this system that really caught my eye.
Oh, the grading descriptors.
Yes. In the grading descriptors, a grade between 75 and 79 is officially labeled did not meet expectations. But mathematically, because the minimum passing grade is 75, a 75 is still considered passing. How does that make sense?
It sounds like a total linguistic paradox, right?
Yeah.
But it perfectly illustrates the philosophy of criterion reference systems.
How so?
Well, you either hit the numerical criteria for passing or you don't. The label did not meet expectations is just a qualitative warning that the student is right on the edge of failure, but mathematically they cross the threshold.
Okay, I think I get it.
Think of a driver's license test. That is the ultimate criterion referenced assessment.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, you either meet the standard for safe driving or you do not. It doesn't matter if every single other person taking the test that day drove flawlessly or if every other person crashed into a wall.
Right, the criteria is the same.
Exactly. You are judged entirely against the criteria for safety on the road, not against the crowd.
You either stop at the red light or you don't. The DMV doesn't pass you just because the guy before you ran 2 red lights and you only ran 1.
Thankfully, no, they do not.
Okay, so if we agree that hitting the criteria is the only thing that matters, what happens when the test itself is fundamentally broken?
Now we're getting into test design.
Right. How do we mathematically prove a test is fair? Because I'm sure every person listening to this has taken a test where the questions felt like they came from a completely different planet than the lectures.
Oh, definitely. And that brings us to the twin pillars of assessment design: validity and reliability.
Okay, so let's define those.
Validity asks the fundamental question: does the test actually measure what it claims to measure?
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. If you give a 10-year-old a mathematics test full of incredibly complex, culturally specific word problems, you might actually be measuring their reading comprehension and their cultural background rather than their math skills.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that makes it an invalid measure of mathematics.
That is fascinating. And I know there are several types of validity, but the one that stands out to me is predictive validity. This is the idea of whether a score can accurately predict future performance, right?
Yes, exactly. The classic example is the SAT or the ACT in the United States.
Right.
The entire premise of those tests is predictive validity. They claim that a high score on a Saturday morning as a high school junior predicts a high grade point average in your freshman year of college.
And if it doesn't?
Well, if the data over time shows that kids who ace the test end up failing in college, then the test lacks predictive validity. It's essentially useless for its intended purpose.
That makes total sense. So validity is about measuring the right thing, but what about reliability?
Reliability is all about consistency. Does the test produce similar scores when administered repeatedly under similar conditions?
Like if I take it twice, do I get the same score?
Exactly. Or if 2 different teachers grade the exact same essay, do they give it the same mark? If a student takes a test on Tuesday, forgets everything, and takes an identical version on Thursday, do they get roughly the same score?
Wait, I have to ask. In the real world, you can't just force students to take the exact same test twice just to see if your test is reliable. So how do test makers actually calculate that consistency?
They use measures of internal consistency using statistical formulas like Cronbach alpha or the Cooter-Richardson Formula 20 or KR20.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that for me, because that sounds intense.
It does, but it's actually quite elegant. Imagine a 50-question test on algebra. Instead of making the student take it twice, a computer splits the test in half. Say the odd-numbered questions versus the even-numbered questions.
Yeah.
If the test is reliable, a student should score roughly the same percentage on the odds as they do on the evens.
Oh, I see.
Right. If a student gets all the odd questions right but fails all the even questions, the test lacks internal consistency. The items aren't working together to measure the same thing.
That is so smart.
Yeah. And Cronbach's alpha is simply a number from 0 to 1 that tells you how well all those items correlate with each other.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The educational literature highlights a crucial relationship between these two concepts. A test can be reliable without being valid, but it cannot be valid without being reliable.
Yes, that is a core rule.
Let me pull an analogy from our source material that perfectly explains this. Imagine a bathroom scale.
Okay.
If that scale consistently tells you that you are exactly 10 kilograms heavier than you actually are, it is incredibly reliable. It gives you the exact same mathematically consistent result every single time you step on it.
Right. It's very consistent.
But it is absolutely not valid because it is measuring the wrong weight.
That is exactly right. Reliability is necessary, but it is not sufficient for validity.
So even if you build a mathematically reliable test, individual questions can still be terrible. And this brings us to item analysis.
Yes. Item analysis.
Test creators actually use statistics to analyze individual multiple-choice questions after a test is taken to see if a specific question was fair.
They do through two key statistics, the difficulty index and the discrimination index.
Okay, let's start with difficulty.
The difficulty index is pretty straightforward. It's just the proportion of people who got it right. If 90% get it right, it's too easy. If 10% get it right, it's too hard.
Makes sense.
The ideal sweet spot is usually between 0.30 and 0.70, but the discrimination index is much more revealing about human psychology.
Let's talk about the discrimination index, because wait, if a question is just really difficult, is it automatically a bad question? How do test makers mathematically tell the difference between a genuinely tough concept and a trick question?
By looking at exactly who gets it right.
Okay.
The discrimination index measures how well a specific question differentiates between high-achieving students and low-achieving students.
So a good question separates the two.
Exactly. A positive index means the students who scored highest on the overall test generally got this specific question right, and the low scorers generally got it wrong. That means the item is doing its job. It's tough, but fair.
Right.
But if an item has a negative discrimination index,
This is the part that completely blew my mind.
it means the lowest performing students on the test got this specific question right, while the highest performing students got it wrong.
I remember taking a history test in high school where I studied for hours, knew the material inside out, and got a multiple choice question wrong because I noticed a tiny nuance in the phrasing.
Oh, yep, that happens all the time.
Meanwhile, a kid next to me who hadn't studied at all just guessed C and got it right. That is a negative discrimination index in action.
Exactly. It is a massive statistical red flag. When educational psychologists see a negative discrimination index, it almost always indicates a deeply flawed question.
Like it was worded badly.
Yeah, a confusingly worded option or a trick question. The smartest students overthought it, or they saw an ambiguity the teacher didn't intend, while the students guessing randomly happened to stumble onto the answer key.
It mathematically validates every student who has ever argued with a teacher that a question was actively trying to trick them.
It really does.
But it also makes me think, if multiple choice tests require this level of intense Cronbach's alpha level statistical analysis just to prove they aren't fundamentally gaslighting us, isn't there a better way to assess what someone actually knows in the real world?
There is, and the field refers to it as authentic assessment or performance-based assessment.
Authentic assessment.
Yeah. Instead of asking someone to fill in a bubble sheet identifying the steps of the scientific method, an authentic assessment asks them to design and conduct an actual experiment.
Oh, I like that.
Or, instead of taking a multiple-choice test on the rules of persuasive writing, you are asked to write a real letter to a real audience about a genuine issue.
Doing the thing instead of just memorizing facts about the thing.
Exactly. It assesses what you can do with what you know. And returning to the K-12 grading system in the Philippines we mentioned earlier, performance tasks actually carry the highest weight in grading.
Oh, really?
Yeah, typically 40 to 50% of the student's overall grade. This reflects a global shift toward demonstrated competencies. Portfolios are another tool used here.
Right, like an ERP portfolio.
Exactly. A portfolio is a curated collection of student work over a long period of time to show actual growth.
But the challenge with having someone write an essay or build a portfolio is that you can't just run it through a Scantron machine, right?
No.
You can't. You have to evaluate it manually. And to do that fairly, you have to use rubrics. There are generally two kinds, holistic and analytic. A holistic rubric gives a single overall score based on a general impression. An analytic rubric breaks the assignment down and evaluates each specific criterion separately, like scoring grammar, argument, and formatting, all independently.
Yeah. Holistic is fast but vague. Analytic is time-consuming, but incredibly detailed. And this distinction leads us to the most important element of this entire deep dive: feedback.
Feedback is huge.
It is. According to the research of educational researcher John Hattie, feedback is the single most powerful tool in assessment for improving learning. But not just any feedback.
Right. I want to ask you, the listener, to think about the last time you received a performance review at work, or maybe feedback on a creative project you were passionate about. Was it just a holistic thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yeah, did your boss just give you a vague good job or needs work?
Right. Or was it an analytic breakdown that actually gave you specific, actionable steps to improve?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Hattie's research shows that specific, descriptive, task-focused feedback produces far greater learning gains than grades alone, or even praise alone.
Just saying good job isn't enough.
No. Telling someone you're so smart doesn't help them fix a math error. Effective feedback tells you exactly what you did well, exactly what needs improvement, and specifically how to bridge that gap. It focuses on the task, not the person.
And timing matters. The research insists it has to be timely, given when the learner can still actually act on it. Giving me detailed feedback on a project 3 months after it's finished is completely useless.
Exactly. Furthermore, sharing those analytic rubrics with the learner before the task even begins is transformative.
Like showing them the rules of the game.
Yes, it shows them exactly what quality looks like. It removes the mystery of what the boss or the teacher wants. When you combine clear expectations with timely, specific feedback, you give the learner agency. You turn assessment from a weapon used to judge them into a roadmap they can use to grow.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We started by looking at the manuals used to train teachers, but we ended up uncovering the blueprint for human growth.
We really did.
We've learned that assessment is a complex, delicate ecosystem. It is not just about slapping a final number on a piece of paper. That's just measurement. That's just summative.
Right.
True assessment is an ongoing, reliable, valid, and highly specific feedback loop. It requires formative checks, it requires authentic performance instead of just bubble sheets, and most importantly, it requires descriptive, actionable feedback.
And this raises an important question, one that builds directly on the concept of assessment as learning that we discussed earlier, the idea of metacognition.
Oh, yes.
As adults, most of us leave the school system and we just passively wait for bosses or society or algorithms to provide summative assessments of our lives.
We do.
We wait for our annual salary bumps, our job titles, our yearly performance reviews to tell us how we are doing. We wait for someone else to evaluate us. But what if we applied assessment as learning to our daily adult lives?
Oh, I love where this is going.
Think about it. What if you didn't wait for an external evaluation? What if you created your own analytic rubric for the kind of professional or partner or person you want to be?
Break it down into specific criteria.
Exactly. And what if you engaged in daily formative self-assessment against that rubric? Checking your own progress, adjusting your own strategies, providing yourself with task-focused, actionable feedback instead of just vague self-praise or paralyzing self-criticism.
That is a profound paradigm shift. The real secret of education isn't figuring out how to pass a standardized test. It's learning how to become your own most effective evaluator. It's moving from dreading the final grade to owning the daily growth.
Absolutely.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time, keep assessing, keep growing, and whatever you do, don't let anyone judge you with a broken scale.